Hey students, it's our last walkthrough of the chapter, and I thought I might try something different. I am going to walk you through the instructions in the textbook. If you feel confident walking through the instructions on your own, feel free to do so. There's just a lot of like logging consoles and going back and changing things just to see how they work. So I thought it might be a little better if I explain that. Now, with that being said, that means I'm going to have to stop recording and then start recording several times. So if the video seems a little choppy, it's because I've had to stop and restart and all that fun stuff. Okay, so do not start this tutorial until you have completed the first and second part of the walkthrough. We're beginning this section, I'm on page 492. But please do go back and read at least that section on defining custom JavaScript objects on page 490. Okay, so we need a way for our orbits, like when we add a name basically, which is not going to work right now because we haven't completed the project. But we want the passenger's information to appear on the ticket detail. So we're going to do that with objects, and I'm really sad that we don't have more time this semester because there's so many fun things that you can do with objects, and I feel like we're just getting into the good stuff, and then the semester's over. Okay, so you need to add this to your global variable section at the top of your document in your orbits.js. And let's notice a couple of little different things that we're doing here. So we're creating an object called ticket. And when we create an object, we're going to put those in a set of curly brackets. Now, each property that we have in this object right now, we have date, we have first name and last name. We define what the property's name is, and then we put a set of semicolon. Now, if we wanted to go ahead and pass a value into that, we could assign it a value here, but right now we're going to leave that empty and pass it a value later. These are separated with a comma, and again, the spacing is not really that important. We could have typed this all on one line. Notice there is not a comma after the last property. Now, we talked about objects several times. Remember our analogy to the car? We said a car was an object and it could have properties like its color, and then it could have functions like it can accelerate and it can brake. So these are the properties of the ticket object, but we don't quite have any functions yet, but you could certainly include functions in your object as well, okay? All right, let's go to the create event listeners, and we need to, right above that, create a new function. So right above your create event listeners, and this is going to be a part where I pause the video and type the code. So if you want to pause the video as well and look on page 493, and we'll type that code in. Above the create event listeners function, I've created the register name function, and this starts on page 493, steps 2, 3, 4, and 5. So let's talk a little bit about what this code is doing. The first line, var passenger list, is accessing a ID from our HTML file, the book trip HTML file, and this is the ticket section that displays over here on our page, okay? So we want to access this unordered list in that HTML file so that we can then add list items to that unordered list. And that's what we're doing with the next line. We're creating new list items so that we can add passengers' names to that list item, okay? The next two lines of code we are accessing and changing the value of our ticket object. So let me scroll up here on this side so you can remember what we have. Remember, we have a property of date, a property of F name, and a property of L name. So this line of code here is changing the value of first name to whatever the user typed in this text box. And then this line of code is changing the value in our ticket object L name to whatever the user typed in this text box. Okay? Now, let me close this so we can see full screen. This is then changing. So we had a new LI that we created here. This is changing that to the first name, adding a space so that the first name and last name are not right next to each other, and then the last name. And then we are appending that. Remember, parent, and this is our parent up here, that is simply just this unordered list in our HTML document, and appending that. So basically adding a list item to that unordered list. Okay? Then we want to go and clear these two text boxes. So take away what the user typed in those so that it's easier for them to add something else in there. We want to, this will then display the information over here in the ticket details. And then this line of code simply takes the focus, or basically where the cursor will be flashing, it takes it back to first name. Okay? So hopefully all that made sense. If you want to pause it here and type from my code, or if you want to add from the book, go ahead. Okay. So after we do that, we need to add an event listener that when this button is clicked, it will add the passengers' names to the ticket information. So this is the lines of code needed to do that, and that is step 6 on page 494. So if you want to pause here and copy my code, or if you want to look in the book, do so now. The last thing that we need to do for this particular section is find our select date function. And once we have that, we're going to go to the very end of that select date function, and we are going to add these 3 lines of code. So in the register name function, we added the F name and the L name to our ticket object. Here we're going to add the date to our ticket object. So here we are setting the ticket date to whatever the user selected from the calendar that we created. We're changing that to the local date string, or locale date string, which is basically just going to put it in a format that's recognizable to us, as opposed to the long string. Like if you remember from our date method tutorial, it would say something like Friday, January the 1st, 2020, and then it would have like a big long string of information after that. This is just going to be like a recognizable date. Once we do that, we are going to set the information over here so that it appears over here, and then show that. This is what makes that happen. It's hidden right now, and now that the user has picked this, we want to show the date over here on the side. So if you want to pause this to type this code in your select date function, do so now, or you can type it from step 7 on page 494. All right, let's see if our information is working. So flip back over to your book trip file, and if we add a name, let's add Princess Peach, and let's say she's going on May 4th, then let's add her, and there she is. And notice that it cleared those out and took my focus back here, so I could add another one. So let's add Yoshi. What does Yoshi have a last name? We'll call him Eggman. I don't know. I don't know what his last name is. But you can see, and you can keep adding passengers there. Okay? All right. So I'm going to stop this video, and then I'll be back with more information in just a second. So let's take a look at what this looks like in console. So go ahead. You can add 2 fake passengers like I did, and have your pick a date for your countdown. And let's open up console, Command-Alt-J if you're using Chrome. And in console, let's type ticket to look at that ticket object. Now, if we press enter, we can expand this and we can see that the last one that we entered, which was Yoshi Eggman, not his real name, is here, and then the date that we picked from the selection date. So these are now the values, or the last values of that ticket object. Okay? So let's play around with that a little more. We can have objects within objects. So let's scroll up to our ticket section, and this is on page 497 if you want to follow along in the book. And we're going to have a sub object inside this. So date is still going to be the same, but now we're going to have an object inside of this object called passengers. Now we'll do a colon and a set of curly brackets. So I'll need to move this curly bracket after L name. And then let's indent these for the sake of readability. Okay? So in order for us to make these changes and it work correctly, now whenever it's accessing first name and last name, it has to go to ticket and then it has to access passengers. So let's scroll down in our register name function. Ooh, fun, fun. See, this is what you get when you get long tutorials. Okay, so here where we have ticket.firstname. Well, first name is no longer a property of ticket. It's a property of passengers that is a property of ticket. So we have to add a passenger. Oh, look at me misspelling things. There we go. And we'll need to do the same thing here. Okay, so I'll give you just a second if you want to pause and make sure that you've made those changes to your code. All right, then we also need to make those changes here and here, okay? So we'll need to do dot passengers and dot passengers. Okay, so let's refresh this here. It's not going to make a lot of changes here that you see, but we'll see it behind the scenes with console. So I'm going to do Princess Peach again. I'm going to pick the 30th. There we go. Okay, so if I go down here and I type in ticket to look at my ticket object, I can see that the date that I selected is there as a value of the date property. And if I expand this even further, I see that I have this other object, and I can expand it even further to see that it has a property of first name, property of last name that has a value of princess and a value of peach. Okay, so maybe that makes a little more sense with the objects. I'm on page 500 if you want to follow along in the book. And starting this section, we're just going to change and manipulate a lot of our code just to try out new things. So when we created this ticket object, we declared it and added some properties. We added the date property. We have a sub object with a property of F name and L name. That's not the only way that we could add properties to an object. So let's practice that by removing the date object, or date property, excuse me. Remove the date property. And then let's scroll down to our select date. We're not going to remove anything here. We're just going to take a look. This line of code here, despite the fact that date no longer exists in that object, this line of code will create the date property in the ticket object. Okay, so let's try it out on our code and make sure that's happening. I'm going to refresh my page. I'm going to add Princess Peach. We'll pick a random day and let's add that. And to make sure that happened, we'll go to our console and type in the ticket object, and we still see the date there. That's because that line of code added that date property to our ticket object, and then we still have our sub object of passengers with the value of Princess Peach for F name and L name. Okay, so let's take a look at this document as it stands. So I've added a passenger, Princess Peach, and then I went to console and typed in ticket to take a look at that object's values, and then I can see that passengers F name has a value of princess, L name peach, and then I added a new passenger Iggy Koopa and took a look at the ticket properties there, and now F name is Iggy and L name is Koopa. What really happened there is the values of those properties changed when I entered a new passenger. But that's probably not what we want as a programmer. We probably want some way to store all of those passengers. We may need to print tickets later, or we may want to display the passengers on another page. So we need a way to keep those values in our passengers sub-object. So we can kind of change the way that our ticket object is created, and that way we can access values like an array. It's called an associative array. So let's go and change our ticket object to look like this. Okay, why do I have an error there? Oh, because this is supposed to be a comma and not a semicolon. Okay, there we go. Let's change our ticket to look like that. And this passenger on ticket property will be a counter variable that will count how many passengers we have on the ticket. And then later we'll create the first name and last name properties for this passenger sub-object. Okay, so pause it here if you need to add that. And then let's go down to the register name, and we're going to add these lines of code. Okay, so we're creating two new variables. This here, we're accessing the passenger on ticket property of our ticket object, and like we said earlier, that will be a counter variable. So every time register name executes every time this add button is clicked. So when a new passenger is added, it will add 1 to the passenger on ticket. Okay, so that means that we need to change the way that these are referenced here, 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 and here, because there is no more fname property direct. We're kind of accessing it through our associative array. If you want to look at in the book, what we just completed was on page 503. And then I'm going to refer to page 504 because it has highlighted what we need to change in the rest of this function. Okay, so notice all these instances we have changed to square brackets. So let's see what that kind of looks like in our console. Come refresh your console and let's add a name. Pick a random date and let's add, what do we say, Iggy Koopa. Okay, so now let's log ticket and take a look at this object. So now passengers on ticket has a value of 2 because it was reflected as a counter variable, and we do indeed have 2 passengers. And if we click on this triangle to expand it even further, notice that we have passengers. Fname 1 is Princess and Peach. Fname 2 is Iggy and Koopa. So this has allowed us to notice fname 1 because we added 1 before we defined these is why it started at 1 and not 0. Okay, so fname 1 is Princess, Lname 1 is Peach, Fname 2 is Iggy, and we could keep going. We could add another person, and then if we came and logged ticket again, now we have 3, and we would have Lname 3 of Yoshi. Got to expand this even further, and Lname 3 of Egg. Okay, so I hope that made sense. I know this video is just all choppy, but I'm doing my best. Okay, so moving on to page 507 in our book. So we've said before, thinking back to when we first learned about objects, we said objects have properties, In the car example, we said it has color, it could have 2 doors, it could have 4 doors, it could be a convertible, but then it also does things. It has functions. We can accelerate, we can brake. And in this example of our ticket object, we just had properties, but we can also have functions. So let's add this little bit of code to our ticket object. Notice that there is a comma there. And that takes care of step 2 on page 507. Now we need to scroll down to the update total cost function. Right here. And we're going to change this first line. We're going to leave that $250 there because it's $250,000 per passenger. And we're going to calculate how much it's going to cost for all the passengers. So we need to access that counter variable, which was passengers on ticket, and making this final statement look like this. Now, I gave you a couple little hints that this was coming. This is the keyword that references the object that called the function where this statement is located. Okay, now I really wish we had more time to spend with this. This is one of those unique things where we could really dive into programming a lot more, and I strongly encourage you. There are numerous tutorials on YouTube that will explain this in detail. I might even try to post a few if you want to take a gander at those and learn more about how this works. But this is where we start really getting into the power of programming. Okay, so now we need to scroll up to the register name function, and we are going to, on a new line before, let's see, register name. I lost it. Wait. This is really hard to do and read things too. Register name. On a new line before the closing curly bracket, we're going to add ticket. No, wrong one. Ticket.calc cost. Okay, so that's the method of that ticket object. And then in the select date function, let's find select date. We are going to remove this update total cost function. So we're going to delete that. Okay, so now if we refresh, let's see what happens when we start adding passengers. So again, I'll start with Princess, Peach. Now let's pick a date, and we'll do Iggy, Koopa. Oh, let's go even further and let's have Yoshi on there again. Okay, so now let's come and log ticket. And we noticed the same things about our passengers that we noticed before, but look what changed. Our total cost is now referencing how many per. It also changed this price of how much it's going to cost in 60 monthly payments. Okay, so I don't know if you guys can afford to go to Space, but I'm going to sit this trip out. That's it for this walkthrough. If you have any questions, email me. I hope the choppiness of this is not too confusing. I'll find out when I edit it. But remember, if you need to jump on a Zoom, we can always Zoom. And this is our last week. It's our last week, y'all. Okay, bye.